Hey, this is John March, and you're here again for Guitar Outside the Box. This is introductory lesson number 2, just to kind of give you a sense of the kind of things we're going to be talking about in the series. A question I get a lot is, how do you develop a chord vocabulary? You know, I get this question a lot, is how do you know so many chords? So there's a couple of answers to that question. First of all, I think that playing music, playing guitar, playing any instrument is basically a language. So if I'm developing my skills in speaking any language, you're going to start with building blocks, simple alphabet, very basic words, syntax, and then you start putting them together over time. That's one answer for how developing facility on any instrument is you're developing your skills in a language. Another explanation for me is that I had the good fortune to study with Ted Green for a long time, and so I spent a lot of time going through 2 of his books, which are Chord Chemistry, which is an incredibly detailed analysis of how chords and voicings work in a shape-based way, and it goes from extremely simple to extremely complex and challenging chords. And modern chord progressions, which is actually an implementation of those voicings, but with a melody inherent in that. So, in other words, he could show you that this is C major, E minor, D minor, and G7. But what Ted would do is he would say, well, that's beautiful, but what about... So that you get that nice little inner melody. Which I think is really interesting. You can develop that. So that's kind of where I started from, was the idea of where are my shapes? And then Ted opened my mind and my ears to the idea of, well, it's not just shapes, it's notes. What are the notes that you're choosing? So you do have to have a basic understanding of how harmony in theory works to develop a chord vocabulary. You have to know what makes a major triad, what makes a minor triad, what makes a diminished chord and an augmented chord, and then the extensions of what types of 7th chords there are: major 7th, minor, major 7th, dominant 7th, altered chords, those kinds of things, the basic harmonics. And the great thing about Ted's books is they're all listed out. I mean, you can know that a major triad is in a major scale, the root, the major third, and the 5th. So knowing that the root, third, and 5th are a major triad gives me a whole lot of... Basically, I can see those notes on the neck and know where to go. So if you refer back to neck mapping has a lot of value in that particular case, because neck mapping allows you to, for example, with a G major chord, I could just map out all the G natural, B natural, and D naturals across the neck and see what my options are in terms of creating a voicing. And then in terms of expanding that, I can look at how the voicings relate to each other, the notes. I really want to be clear, a voicing... So let me step back for a second. There are 3 elements happening in music when you're playing. 4 elements. There's melody, which is 1 note at a time. There's harmony, which is more than 1 note at a time. There's rhythm, which is what ties it together. And then, well, I always go, and then there's silence, which is the container that all these things happen in. But that's another subject. In terms of harmony and melody, when you're looking at harmony, it's an organizational system. When you talk about the relationship between one note to the next, if I play the note G to A, it doesn't sound like a lot. But if I add the 5th, that starts to get interesting. And if I add the root, you kind of get this neat... So now I've got the root, the 5th, the 9th, and that's kind of a nice colored chord. But that original interval wasn't so sweet as when I added the 5th. So the idea is it's how you organize notes and how you organize notes into scales and chords. So for example, if I take this G major chord, so the 5th fret of the D string, the 4th fret of the G string, and the 3rd fret of the B string, playing the notes G, B, and D, I can take any one of those notes and displace it by an octave. So if I did that, that's a big stretch, and I'm not sure it's very useful. So let me drop that D an octave. So that's 2 different voicings now. So all I did was drop that an octave. It's more useful, they talked about this as drop 2 voicings, to drop the middle voice. So I drop that B an octave, and I get this nice voicing. I use this a lot, this particular chord, like when I'm in a country song, as opposed to, and it's also useful to have different places where you can play it. But once I've established this is the chord I like, I can move this chord to the next note in the scale, or I can keep them in the same positions. But the idea is that this note is a G major chord, B, G, and D, and I'm going to move that to a C chord, which is C, G, and E. That G didn't move. And if I add an A, that becomes A minor. So I've got 3 chords without doing anything. Okay? So if I move to the next chord, and then if I move to the next available chord, which is a D chord, the next chord is an E chord, the next chord is an F sharp minor 7 flat 5, which if I add the low note, D7, and then a G chord again, and then an A minor chord, and a B minor chord. So let's go back to the beginning. That first voicing is a G major chord. If I lower that G to an F sharp, it's a B minor chord. So you can see that within the diatonic chords means the chords that are generated by a G major scale. Because that's all I'm working with is the notes in a G major scale. I can generate all these cool chord options for myself. And then I've got a song because I introduce rhythm. So let's, as we go forward, let's talk about the ideas of how one generates a chord vocabulary through exploration. This is just an introduction to the idea of how you can take a basic voicing and start looking for all sorts of different other options. If this sounded interesting to you, you can sign up for the series below. You're also welcome to check me out at zenguitarguy.com. I'm available for private lessons through Skype. And you're also welcome to go to Bandcamp and check out Bandcamp Zen Guitar Guy, and there's some records there that I have created. And we'll continue the exploration. How do you create a harmonic vocabulary and different ways of approaching the learning process that's not based on geography and geometry? Okay, this is John March, Guitar Outside the Box. Thanks for being here.